Hi, I am Mary Melorano. I am a volunteer for the Business Advocacy Committee for the Campbell County Chamber of Commerce. Today I am visiting with Micky Shober, who is running for the office of House District 31.
Good morning, everyone.
Thanks for visiting with us today, Micky. We just have a few questions for you. The first one is, what do you feel are the key responsibilities of the position you are running for?
Okay, good question. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. The key responsibilities of the House representative are it's part of the lower chamber of the Wyoming State Legislature. You work in conjunction with the Senate, and it forms the legislative branch of state government. We're also charged to work alongside the governor to establish state budgets. And through that process is the House and the Senate duties are passing bills on public policy matters, and that can be passing or defeating, and those then become state statutes. Also, both sides are, the Senate and the House are charged with setting the levels for state spending. They also, part of their duty is raising or lowering taxes. That's where the ability for taxing in Wyoming comes out of, as it comes out of the House and the Senate. It also is another part of that duty is voting to uphold or override the governor vetoes. And so once a bill is passed through the Senate and the House, it goes to the governor's office, and the governor has the ability to allow it to become law without signature. By signing it, it becomes law, and the governor has the ability on budgets to veto portions of a budget item, and then it's up to the Senate and the House. If you can get a majority there, you can override the governor's decision, and so that decision can be either way. And so, and then last but not least, we're to represent the voters in the district, and Wyoming is divided up by equal population, and representation is equal by the census. And so state population divided by 30, which is the number of senators. That is, there's 60 representatives, and so there's 2 representative districts in each Senate district.
Okay.
And it's defined by population counts from the 2010 census. After the 2020 census, the legislature will form a committee, and they will redistrict, and that will make sure that everybody has equal representation. And so we're first charged with representing the voters in our district, represent next the county and the city, that's cities that are within the county, and the state of Wyoming, and what's good for the state of Wyoming. And most of the time, if it is good for Campbell County, it's good for the state of Wyoming.
Right.
So.
Right. And another good reminder to complete your 2020 census.
Yes, it is. And it's, there's lots of other things. It's sales tax is a portion within the county based on population. And so you take the total population of Campbell County,
Okay.
and the percent that's in the city gets that percent of the sales tax.
Gotcha.
A lot of funds that come back from the state, even maybe federal funds, they come back, and a lot of those are based on, or part of the formula is based on population. Population has a lot to do with how funds are distributed.
Very interesting. So the next question is, what can the state do to hold steady or decrease the cost to ensure sustainability for business, if anything?
It's a tough question, and it's And I'll start out by saying is when I have served on the school board and served on the county commission, always had a good idea of how things work. But until you're really there and you start to see things, you develop a better understanding of the process. So, so when one of the things that comes up with in state and in business relation is the state has the ability to reduce taxes, but they don't have the ability to reduce taxes for a specific entity that would say, well, they would come here for economic development. And for an example, Indiana just attracted a new plastic molding company.
Okay.
It's a $10 million new facility, 250 jobs. They were given a $1.75 million state tax credit.
Wow.
And so by the way we're set up, our property taxes are the same. They're value-based. The percentage is the same to everybody that has property in that same classification.
Gotcha.
And so, also, but another part of this process is to reduce rules and regulations, and I'm referring to as a state, we get to enforce the rules that Environmental Protection Agency comes down, the Department of Environmental Quality, all of those kinds of things, and sometimes those rules can be overreaching and cost-consuming, and so in business, time is always money, and so the longer you work to get permits to build a building or do a project, and some of those projects move out into years, and years cost money. So some of the EIS programs that I've been involved with, once they went past their projected 3-year, for example, a 3-year EIS would cost $5 million, and if it wasn't completed in that first 3 years, it was the price tag was $1 million a year.
Wow.
And so there's, as a commissioner, I've spent time with state and local governments, in federal governments with a reduction in slowdown of taxes and rules and regulations. And another example is Wyoming was given the authority to permit uranium mining. And then when I served on the Wyoming DEQ Land Quality Advisory Board, we were tasked with that process of the federal had some rules that had to apply in, and we were charged with how to make Wyoming's rules fit that, but it also it sped the process up to receive the mining permit. And so that was that's one of the ways that you can do things, and it reduces the cost of business, and the other part is, almost Wyoming is a long ways in between towns, communities,
right,
those kinds of things, and so infrastructure is a very big part of our life. If you make something, manufacture something, it's freight out. If you consume in the construction business, all our materials are made somewhere else. It's shipped in here, and so infrastructure is railroads, airplanes, and highways for truck transportation and transportation of employees back and forth. And last but not least is Wyoming and Campbell County. Everybody needs to maintain a business-friendly government and a business-friendly environment. And when I say that is that, For example, there's been a couple companies, more than two, but they manufacture firearms-related products, or for example, Weatherby manufactures firearms in Sheridan. And some of the comments that I've been told is where they were coming from, those states were becoming anti-gun, those kinds of products, and they wanted to put their facility in a state that they were comfortable that people were okay with what they made, and they didn't have to have their manufacturing facility in some hidden hole somewhere so that nobody knew what they were making there. And people would be proud to work in those facilities. And so those are some things that we always need to be conscious of in Wyoming, that we maintain a friendly government, friendly to business.
Great. What process would you use to determine how SLIB money is distributed? And SLIB is an acronym for the State Land Investment Board, State Loan Investment Board, which it's the highest elected officials in the state.
That's correct. So there's the State Land Board, which is made up of the 5 state elected officials. SLIB is State Land Investment Board, that is made up of the 5 state elected officials. They're also SLIB is part of the Wyoming, in a way, part of the Wyoming Business Council. And so, for example, I've been to some of the Wyoming Business Council meetings, testified in those meetings, and also went to the SLIB board meetings and testified in those meetings. And it's a process, and it's so when it goes through the Business Council is 15 members appointed by the governor. They typically represent business interests in Wyoming. They come from areas in Wyoming. We typically have somebody on that board that is from this area. They look at each one of these applications. There's a form that's filled out, and when the form's turned in, Wyoming Business Council staff looks at that completed application, makes a recommendation to the Wyoming Business Council group. They look at that, they vote yes or no. Then there is a recommendation from the Wyoming Business Council that goes to the SLIB board of the 5 elected officials. Each one of those elected officials has a staff member that looks at each one of those applications that comes to them, and they make a decision. And so I have seen some reasons why, and they were, one of the reasons was there was only, the money's allocated to the Business Council by quarters, and they can't spend more than what they have available funds. And so sometimes those don't get that way. When it gets up to the level of the SLIB board, they have the ability to take monies from some other funds or some other places, or be creative. Camplex, for example, was denied, and it was a do not recommend, do not pass. The Business Council it was the first time they had seen an application that was for remodel of a building, and it wasn't all new construction, and they also didn't have enough money to fund all of it. And they felt like the application was an all or none application. So after conversations and testimony in front of the SLIB board, and there was a question asked there, would you consider part grant, part loan? And in the end, that's the way that came back to Camplex, it's part grant, part loan, and it was a very low attractive interest rate. And it was also, and it kind of set a trend then of, there's probably some projects out there that are good, valid projects that are for remodel of structures, not necessarily always build and build new. So I think that the rules are pretty well defined in here. It's like any of those, there's always this example I gave of the remodel, probably now, they've changed the rules and so they have the ability to look at that and you know, so I think in answer to this question, this process always, it's like anything, always needs to be looked at. You take feedback from the people that are using this application process and see if there is anything in that process that needs to be changed. And it's, excuse me, it's set up to be fair across the state of Wyoming, and some grants just, sewer and water grants or emergency grants have a higher value and a different criteria than some of the other types of grants. So SLIB Board also administers, and through the Business Council, some of the COVID-19 federal monies are going to come that way. What we call CMAQ, which stands for Quality Air Mitigation, monies that come back to counties for dust control on county roads and cities for dust control. That is federal money, but it comes through that same process. It comes through a SLIB board, but it's also it comes through a different CMAQ board, but that board is underneath the 5 elected officials. And so there's quite a variety of monies that flow down through that process. And so most of the time we're familiar with SLIB money that is in an application process for city governments, county governments, and joint powers boards. Is typically what it's for.
So would you stick with that same process to determine how the SLIB money is distributed?
Well, I don't know, there may be a better way. I'm not sure that there is. And I know that the process is, and I've been involved with some that staff came and said, and looked at our application and said, you're lacking some things here, and we need some letters that say that you lost some businesses that were going to relocate here because you did not have this building. And so staff is helpful with the application process, how it's done. The Business Council is, in my opinion, has always been helpful. And even when I was there and testified for Camplex afterwards, some of the things I said, that's how I knew those, because they come up to me and said, you know, Mickey, if we would have known whatever, we probably would have, the individual said I personally would have voted differently in that regards. And so it's, the other part that's important in this is we get people that represent our area to apply to the governor's office and ask to be nominated and put on these type of boards. And so they're rotating positions. They don't, if there's 2 from this area, they're staggered terms, and there is a term limit. You can only be there so long. So that's probably one of the better things that I see in this, is that we always have good representation on these types of boards.
Great. Good. So if there was anything that you would have liked to discuss that we didn't touch on, you have 1 minute to discuss any of these items that you would like anybody to know about.
Well, I think that when you take on any of the jobs and duties of an elected official, part of your job description is to read, gather information, be informed, and be informed on the pros of it and the cons of it, and listen to the people that you represent, what they have to say. And, also be, sometimes there is a outspoken side and there's another side that's maybe is kind of quiet, but you need to have that information from that side and weigh out those differences. And some of these things, maybe they need a little bit of changing or a little bit of tweaking in and so it's as a representative's job and purpose in this is to look at that, weigh out both sides, and go into it with an open mind, not a mind made up of, I'm always for this or I'm always against this, but look at those kinds of things, and also think about the process of, if this passes or whatever it is, what kind of impact does it have back on Wyoming? What kind of impact does it have back on Campbell County and the citizens here? And so that's probably a process that I think sometimes people don't quite realize all of that information that goes into this. And you're also, during the legislative session, you're overwhelmed with information that comes in, and and it's and I've got a heads up. I've been around this enough as a commissioner and as a school board representative. I've got a really good understanding of how taxes are collected, how taxes work, where they're distributed to, how those kinds of things are working. So that's kind of that in a nutshell.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time for visiting with us today, Micky.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and we'd appreciate your vote on August 18th. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.